Welcome back to the Winterthur Podcast. There are many different people who ensure that Winterthur and its collections are well cared for. From the garden team to the public safety team, each department works to help protect and preserve our museum, garden, and library. Today we are talking about all things conservation. While you may know the day-to-day definition of conservation, a careful preservation and protection of something, you may not think of conservation when discussing a museum. However, the conservation department is a crucial part of Winterthur. From restoring paintings to cleaning fabrics to protecting objects from light, the conservation department takes care of the 90,000 plus object collection. Winterthur is a leader in the field of conservation and collections care and serves as a teaching institute. The Winterthur University of Delaware Program in Art Conservation, or WoodPAC, is a graduate-level program jointly sponsored by the University of Delaware and Winterthur. The faculty is comprised of Winterthur conservators in the Conservation Department and faculty members from the University of Delaware Art Conservation Department. Today we are joined by Leah Palmer and Caitlin Fong, second-year students in the WoodPAC program, who are going to give us the behind-the-scenes of the program. Thank you for joining us, Leah and Caitlin. Conservation isn't a super common career field. How did each of you become interested in the field?
So my name is Leah Palmer, like we said, and I learned about the field of conservation in high school. I read this novel called People of the Book by Geraldine Brooks, and in that story, the main character was a rare books conservator, and she was treating an ancient text that had been passed down kind of from hand to hand across countries, across the world. And she, in her past, studied chemistry, Near Eastern languages, and studio art. So that's kind of what first intrigued me about art conservation. This field is really intensely interdisciplinary, and it also provides a really rare and exciting opportunity to carefully and intimately interact with artworks from across time and space and cultures.
And I'm Caitlin Fong. I'm a second-year student at WoodPAC and an objects major. The way I found art conservation was just through my interest in the visual arts and science, which I've always had since I was a child. And I started out in undergrad as a chemistry major with a studio art minor before I learned about conservation at all, which was very fortuitous looking back at it. While I was in school, a few people suggested that I look into art conservation as a career. And the more and more that I learned about the field, the more I was drawn to it. And once I had my first internship, that was it. I was hooked, and I continued to pursue other opportunities to gain experience. And the more I worked in the field and read up about it, I felt a growing sense of belonging as I met other people who had interests that were similar to mine and also felt so passionately about their work.
And I think both of our kind of why behind being in conservation has definitely shifted over time. Right now, when I think about what is most beautiful to me about conservation, I realize that I've become really way more outward focused. Conservation is no longer just how I get to interact with people and art from across time. It's also just a small way that I am able to bring wholeness and healing to an honestly really broken world, even with my very small reach and radius. Not only do we as conservators have a hand in healing physically damaged artworks, but we also have opportunities to repair severed relationships between objects and people. We are able to make treatment decisions that are really informed by the people who are invested in these objects. And ergo, we have this really cool opportunity to promote meaningful interactions with cultural heritage objects. And as we make objects whole again, we can help people reconnect to their own history as they interact with art in a museum or physically use objects, maybe post a repatriation process. And we are also able to grow in empathy as we care for and interact with objects that tell stories from a really wide range of communities through the objects that they love. So in short, art conservation is a really amazing form of restorative justice, allowing humanity to experience renewal, restoration, and beauty of artworks so that we can really meaningfully interact with them and, by extension, each other.
Yeah, my experience really mirrors what Leah just really beautifully described. The more that I learned about the field and my understanding sort of matured about what conservation really is, my draw has changed from an academic pursuit of understanding art and materials more to a passion about learning about the people behind objects. And in prioritizing the human aspects of the objects that I conserve, I've grown to be increasingly interested in how to better incorporate a collaborative approach to my conservation work. And this is really key for me, as these intangible values and narratives behind objects can only really be preserved in partnership with people who are connected to the communities that these objects come from, because they have a holistic sense of what's important about the object and what needs to be preserved. This also speaks to the necessity for a diverse demographic of conservators, as each of us brings our own unique sensitivities and knowledge, which impacts the way that we approach our conservation treatments. And of course, thanks to the hard work of so many people in our field who have worked so hard to make our field more inclusive, collaborative, and people-centric, this has really kept me hopeful for the future and makes me excited to be a part of this wonderful field.
Can you define what conservation means to you, and can you tell us more about how ethics play into conservation?
What conservation means to me is a really fundamental and important question that I've been thinking about deeply as I've started my second year here at Winterthur. To me, conservation is my way of learning about the world and helps me to develop a feeling of interconnectedness. This field sits at the meeting point of material science, social studies, history, craft, and we have this immense privilege, like Leah was saying, to spend countless hours with the objects that we treat. This close looking reveals a detailed picture of an object that is so full of life and is otherwise really difficult to access. We see the nuances of how something is made, the history of its use, if it's been broken and cared for and repaired before. And because of our interdisciplinary training and proximity to these objects, I believe that conservators have the power to uncover and share the stories that objects tell. And this is where ethics comes in, because although we rely heavily on technical analysis and scientific knowledge, the importance of conservation comes from the connection that objects have to people. We care about a particular object and invest all this time and resources into preserving it because of the communities, traditions, and narratives that they represent. The ethics that guides our work as conservators ensures that we're preserving the intangible values along with the physical object. And these ethics guide our decision making, which is really critical at every step that we take in a conservation treatment. For example, this summer I had a really interesting experience working on a mask from Vanuatu, which had aspects of its construction that are considered to be secret knowledge by the Rom society that it originates from. Because of that, I intentionally chose not to conduct materials analysis to respect the intangible values of the mask. And I would like to believe that by doing so, I conserved and preserved an important part of the mask's life and story. But of course, there's no one right way to do anything, and all that we can do as conservators is just to do the best that we can with the knowledge and tools that we have.
To me, art conservation, kind of on a purely definitional level, is a career that uses scientific knowledge and historical context to ethically care for material culture and the people connected to them. But on a really personal level, working in conservation is such a holistic, all-encompassing practice. It engages my intellect, opening avenues for me to learn about materials, cultures, histories, geographies. It engages my body. I'm a former ballet dancer, and I've found parallels between ballet and conservation while on stage and while in the lab. So both ballerinas and conservators have really intense focus and precision, combined with a lot of delicacy and tenderness and artistry, and all these things are wrapped up in dancing and handling objects and treating them. Conservation also really engages my emotions, which we've talked about a little bit. Kind of echoing everything that Caitlin said, treating objects is such a people-oriented task, and caring for art objects allows me to connect with people across time and space through intimately knowing and caring for the objects they created. Caitlin and I have personally discussed the concept of conservation affect, this kind of inexplicable, indescribable, awe-filled feeling of connection with people across time, and we get that when we're able to physically touch a piece of history. I really felt that awe, this affect this summer while I was in Cleveland, Ohio, treating a stucco sculpture from the Ming Dynasty, and the sculpture was of a woman playing a flute. So the Ming Dynasty spanned from 1368 to 1644, and over the years, one of the figure's fingers had been lost. And I really vividly remember one afternoon I was using this plaster-like material to replace her finger, just make it look more whole, bring her hand back to life again. And I was really close to the object, and I was bringing my face really close. I had my hands on her fingers. I was just smoothing my finger over, and as I was looking, I saw on the figure's thumb there was a fingerprint, probably from the original artist who created this piece. And it was so moving. I felt so transported, almost in like a timeless space where the original artist and the figurine and me were all in this like connected interaction. It was just becoming a part of the legacy of this figure and touching the artist across the centuries. So I think that's something that is so beautiful about conservation.
What is your experience like at Winterthur?
Being at Winterthur has been such a whirlwind experience, and one that I really enjoyed and I'm so grateful for. This first year of the Woodpack program is broken up into what we call blocks, where we explore a range of conservation disciplines like paper, paintings, textiles in each of these blocks. Conservators are by nature deeply acquisitive, and we're a little bit of what you might call nerds. We love learning so much, and it was such a wonderful experience to be in grad school finally and be diving deep into such a wide range of topics. In each block, we document an object. Most of these come from either the Winterthur collection or the study collection of the conservation program. And the professors who lead each block are incredibly kind, brilliant, and deeply dedicated to our education. It's been amazing to be able to connect with leaders in the field and to learn directly from them. Along with our blocks, we have 2 science classes. Our materials science class is led by Dr. Leora Mael, where we learned about the chemistry underlying the materials of the objects we work with and the treatments that we conduct. Documentation is another important part of the work that we do, and in our imaging class with Dr. Roxanne Radpour, we learned about really cool techniques for doing things like making digital 3D models and using different wavelengths of light to see below the surface of objects. And really a highlight of my time at Woodpack so far is a community that's built just by being in a cohort of the 10 of us who are all so passionate, so brilliant, so talented, and all in the same boat. And the 10 of us bring our varied interests, backgrounds, and strengths, and we've really bonded over our shared experience here. Our field is a really small one, and it's always changing, so we constantly are learning new things, and our relationships with our colleagues and mentors are really important. So it feels so fulfilling to me to be in this wonderful cohort and to join the educational legacy of the Winterthur program.
And we're continuing that legacy right now. Caitlin and I just started our second year as objects majors. And during the second year, each member of our 10-person cohort has selected a specialization or a major, and those encompass a single class of art objects. These majors grow out of those blocks that Caitlin mentioned. And Caitlin and I are specializing in objects conservation, which encompasses 3-dimensional items, things like ceramic bowls, marble sculptures, even a sword. Caitlin's treating a sword this semester. So throughout the year, we will be completing treatments on a variety of different objects, really diving deeper into the thought processes and the materials that go into ethically caring for these artworks. Also this fall, we're going to spend some time working to bring conservation into the wider Winterthur community through Conservation Clinic, where Winterthur students and conservators meet with visitors to discuss potential treatment options for caretaking the objects that visitors care for and love. So if you're listening, please come to Conservation Clinic. We as conservation students and conservators are so interested in hearing the stories that you have about why you love objects that you've kept around for so long, and we would love to share things that we're learning from our education.
Is there an object that you were particularly excited to work on?
Last year in Textile Block, under block instructor Kate Sawmill, researched and documented an archaeological textile from modern-day Peru, and it came from an ancient Andean society, possibly Nazca, from around 500 CE, so it originated like over 1,500 years ago. So just so you can picture it in your mind, imagine a small bundle of yarn and fibers, very colorful, about the size of a small football, just resting in a shallow tray. And I saw that and was like, what is going on? But upon closer examination, I could see that this textile fragment used to be and it still is, an insanely intricate object. It is dyed red, yellow, blue, green, and purple, very colorful, and it was woven in a difficult and actually very time-consuming pattern known as a slit tapestry weave with a discontinuous weft. So there's a lot of really interesting patterns going on. This textile was loaned to the Woodpack program for this block by Bryn Mawr, and in doing research on it, I spoke with Marianne Weldon, the collections manager there. And in our discussion, I learned that this textile was donated to Bryn Mawr from an amateur archaeologist who took it, likely without permissions, from the Andean region from a burial site in the 1960s. And there have been efforts made and discussions had to attempt to return this object to Peru. But in the meantime, Marianne advised me to kind of manipulate this bundle of patterns and fibers so that she could better understand its design and therefore its origin, hopefully moving towards improved potential of bringing it back home. So I brought this kind of bundle to my desk, I turned on my light, I got out all my tools, and I started moving around the various fibers. And after like 2 minutes, I started having a lot of thoughts, a lot of feelings, all very conflicted. So this object was found in a burial context. It was likely a funerary textile created for a deceased person and likely meant to stay with them forever. But now it was on my lab bench. I was kind of operating on it under fluorescent lights. And as I handled the textile to arrange it more legibly, some of the really beautiful tapestry weave began to unravel slightly. And I started thinking about the original weaver of this work, how they would feel about me moving these things around. And then kind of on the flip side of that, conversely, this object is here. It is in Bryn Mawr's possession, in my possession, and its current caretaker had tasked me to treat this object in this way in the hopes that maybe we can bring it some healing and comfort down the road. Manipulating the textile was causing possibly negative changes, but without those changes, it might be more difficult to properly care for it down the line. So in the end, I made only slight headway in untangling this textile, and I was left with a lot of kind of stimulating and helpful questions for myself about how we as conservators should pursue future justice for wrongfully obtained objects while also trying to balance caring for it right now in its present state. And that's definitely something I hope to learn more about and grow in as I progress in my career.
Oh, I really love that story because I think it illustrates all the things that we have to think about in conservation and how it's really difficult to navigate, but can lead us in some ways forward in considering our role as conservators. For me, a memorable object that I worked on was during our photo block. Our professor, Debbie Hess-Norris, has started a tradition of working on a group of objects from the community, which really drives home the lesson that our actions as conservators can have direct impact on people's lives. So for our class, we worked on a group of over 100 photographs from the Delaware Historical Society. The collection that we worked on was of photographs from the 19th and 20th centuries that depict scenes of the Wilmington area, which is where Winterthur is situated in. Photographs are such personal documents, and many of these images were of family and community events. So the one that I mainly worked on was a family portrait of 9 people. Most of these photographs didn't have much background information associated with them. So there was an element of mystery as to who these people were, where were their descendants, and it made me really consider my role in the lifetime of this photograph. Like, how would they feel knowing that I was the one conserving their family's photograph? So when thinking about conservation, I think that photographs are a great illustration of how objects can tell stories and what role we have to play in this world. These photographs depict families, events, and places that are still relevant and integral to people's lives and identities. So through the conservation that my classmates and we all did, our goal was to primarily prolong the life of these photographs, but we're also making sure that these stories that are connected to them won't be lost and will remain accessible for present and future generations.
Thank you, Leah and Caitlin, for telling us about your experience in Woodpack and shedding light on the field of conservation. There are innumerable stories of the people at Winterthur and all the work that makes this place as wonderful as it is. The Conservation Department's effort may not always be visible to the naked eye, but it is no less vital to the collection. Follow along on our social media to see more behind the scenes of Winterthur, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast so that you don't miss any future episodes. Thank you for listening.